Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. My name is Mike Johnson. I'm the National Director for the TABE test, and I'm happy to join you today. And with me today is Christine Kirk, our local Florida and Southeast regional representative. And we're going to talk today about the updates to TABE 13 and 14 and to TABE Class-E. Just a quick housekeeping piece. If you do have any questions, you're welcome to put any questions in the Q&A or in the chat. We are monitoring both of those. Everybody is in a listen-only mode, so to communicate, please use the Q&A or the chat. And then at the end of the presentation, there'll be a survey that will be on the screen for you to provide feedback related to this webinar. Just a real quick update. We'll talk about our current status for TABE and TABE Class-E. We'll go through some of the changes. We'll talk about some of the enhancements that are happening to TABE, and then also finish up with some of the research and resources that are available for both TABE and TABE Class-E this coming year. A quick announcement, this is primarily a Florida-focused webinar. It is put on through IPDAY, and so we will use most of the examples related to Florida. I do know there are attendees from other states, but just please be aware that you need to check with your local resources, whether you're a WIOA funded program or a non-WIOA funded program, and we certainly welcome our out-of-state participants today. Where we sit today with TABE 11 and 12 and TABE Class-E Forms A and B is that both assessments are federally approved for reporting purposes until June of 2025. There was a recent announcement from the U.S. Department of Education that extended all current ESL assessments to June of 2025, so that's the extension for TABE Class-E. Both TABE 11 and 12 and TABE Class-E will go through their updates, and we'll mention that. Some things are not changing. One is that we will continue to offer paper and pencil as an option for non-computer-based programs. Now, you'll see that as we go through some of the examples today. Additionally, with the formatting of TABE, we'll certainly focus on the online platform for most of our updates today, but there is a remote testing option that will continue, as I mentioned, the paper and pencil, and then also offline testing for programs that have limited bandwidth or access to the internet through correctional programs. So the first update for TABE 13 and 14 is that we did submit the application for approval to the U.S. Department of Education on October 1st of last fall, and that's the only day that you can submit applications to the Department of Education. We are still expecting that approval to happen this spring. We haven't gotten word yet from the Department of Education on any changes. We had some questions come in during the winter, and we've answered those questions. And so we're anticipating that announcement to happen either later this April or into May. With TABE 13 and 14, a few key areas are that there are no big changes to the college and career readiness standards or the NRS descriptors that TABE aligns to. So as we look back in the past to previous versions of TABE, when we transitioned from TABE 9-10 to TABE 11 and 12, there was a big change in standards, and we saw that affected with the updates to TABE 11 and 12 becoming much more rigorous of an assessment as it aligned to the college and career readiness standards. So we're not seeing that big of a change for TABE 13 and 14. We'll talk about some of the changes. One of them being a small change to where the objective skills break out across the blueprints, and I'll have some examples of those. Another area is that our paper testing option today with TABE 11 and 12 is, if you're using the current paper test, you know that there is an answer sheet for every level of TABE. For TABE 13 and 14, we're going to go back to a single answer sheet for all levels. So you'll see a little bit of an easier administration process. To do that, we will have more standardized questions across all levels, and specifically for those 2-point questions. In the reading test, for example, the evidence-based selected response, the 2-point questions, there's a few of them on level E, and there's quite a few, up to 15 on level A. To have a single answer sheet, we will have to get to a standard amount of those, whether it's 5 or 6 questions, and they will always be in the same position on the test forms. The big change that I think everybody's kind of anticipating and that we're certainly looking forward to is an overall reduction of testing time That reduction in the testing time is done primarily through the reduced reading load of the student. So that's probably a fancy way of saying just shorter reading passages and shorter questions for the students to read as they're interacting with the TABE test. And so taking less time on the test overall. We don't have the exact times yet set out. We do need to do some additional research for the Department of Education on that. They do want to have actual data of people taking tests. So just as we saw with TABE 11 and 12, we'll see updates to the testing times over the first year or two as we can provide new data to the Department of Education for that. But at the very start, you'll see an update to the testing times being much shorter. Another area of change for TABE is also when I mentioned small adjustments to the domains within each objective area. So on the screen, we're looking at the reading blueprint for TABE 13 and 14. TABE 13 and 14 are the lighter gray shaded areas. TABE 11 and 12 are the darker gray. In the red circle, you notice that today in TABE 11 and 12, the last domain of integration of knowledge and ideas is valued at 15%. Moving over to TABE 13 and 14, it drops down to 13.6. So a very small change. But if you're wondering where that 1+% went, we can look right over next door to level M. Today, level M is valued at 11% for integration of knowledge and ideas, and it will move to 13.6. So it goes up a little. That's one skill within integration of knowledge and ideas that used to be on level E that has been moved up to level M. So we're seeing that small change. So not a big change in your curriculum planning, just small changes related to that. Also, another area of change on the math test is that we are switching to the Desmos calculator system for all TABE math tests. If you're in a K-12 scenario, you may be familiar with Desmos as a platform for calculators for online testing. They're used in almost every state assessment. They're used in almost every graduate school assessment as well. Desmos is a foundation that creates calculator interfaces. Not a big change for TABE. We'll continue to have a 4-function calculator like there is on the left and a scientific calculator like there is on the right. The big change is that if you go to desmos.com to their website, you'll be able to have more instruction related to calculators, more exercises for students to practice with calculators. So just more resources for teachers and for programs. Another change with the calculator is that on the level A test, the highest level of the TABE test, it becomes all calculator. So traditionally on level M, it's part 2. On level D, it's part 2. But for level A, it will be all parts will be calculator for that. There is usually a question related to using the GED calculator, the Texas Instruments one, and that's certainly permissible. Just know that these Desmos calculators are built into the system, so the students will have access to them. But if you're paper and pencil testing, or if you have students that would prefer to use the handheld calculator, it does require a little bit of extra monitoring when you're doing an online test because you want to make sure that they're using the correct calculator for that, but you certainly can use a handheld calculator for that. Looking at the math test and kind of the changes at a high level, we see in the blueprints on the left-hand side, the TABE 11 and 12 blueprints, numbers and operation were broken out. It was number and operation of fractions and number and operation of base 10. Moving forward, we're aligning a little bit more to the College and Career Readiness Standards format, and we see number and operations just becomes one heading for that. The change in the blueprints is more of a change away from our terminology and aligning to the College and Career Readiness terminology. TABE 11 and 12 tried to mix in some TABE 9-10 terminology and some College and Career Readiness terminology, but as we transition to TABE 13 and 14, we are becoming more standardized on the terms that are used within the College and Career Readiness standards.
Mike, there is a question regarding the calculators.
Yes.
The question is, can we now type in the values, or do we still have to click each number with the cursor?
I believe you can type them in, but I will double check that and we can post that as a follow-up to the update site. But that's a great question. Thank you. Just another quick overview of the level D blueprints, and just seeing that again, more consolidation and more high level grouping. So not changes in the blueprints themselves, but just how they're categorized for that. All of these blueprints that we're seeing on the screen will be turned into the more pie chart friendly blueprints that are on the public website of tabetest.com. So you will see an update to the blueprints being posted a little bit later this summer for TABE 13 and 14. Looking at TABE Class-E for a quick second, TABE Class-E again is the assessment for non-native English speakers. They may be ESOL students, they may be ELL students, they may be ESL students, depending on what part of the country you're in. TABE Class-E, we're moving from forms A and B to forms C and D. And again, we also applied back in October 1st of 2023. We did apply first, or more with a priority, because there was the pending expiration date for all ESL assessments in this June of 24, but that was extended. We do know from the U.S. Department of Education's feedback is that they will provide a group response to all the DRC applications. So we initially anticipated hearing back on Class-E first, and then hearing back a little bit later on TABE 13 and 14. But the department has told us that they will just make one announcement for us in the near future. So TABE Class-E, if you're not familiar with that, that's again, reading, writing, speaking, and listening are the content areas. Depending on what state you are in, some content areas are required, and I will use Florida as the example. Reading and listening are the required areas for reporting purposes, but you do have access to writing and speaking as additional domains. That will continue from forms A and B over to forms C and D. The big change for TABE Class-E is that new alignment to the national ELP standards that are the companion to the college and career readiness standards, and also new NRS descriptors. So if you haven't looked at those on the U.S. Department of Education's website, you certainly can make yourself available to those. There are changes. The strong point for TABE Class-E is that we're very well aligned to those changes already with our current objectives. When we go to refresh the test, we're treating it as more of a refresh for the forms. So we're updating the questions for new scenarios. I use as an example, there's a question on the test that is related to numbers and numeracy, and it asks what's the number on a check, and the answer is $75. But the skill of numbers and numeracy is still a valuable skill and a measurable skill. The scenario of using a check as the description of the question is not really relevant for today's population. Both English speaking and non-native English speakers are using less and less checks. And so we would change that scenario to a new format of a question related to more today's terms and usage of numbers. Another area for TABE Class-E is that the paper test will switch from the Scantron scanner and TestMate software that it's currently using, similar to what 910 did for TABE, to the new free DRC local scanning portal. So you will scan answer sheets if you're doing paper and pencil tests directly into our portal. That will allow us to have all that data together, whether it's a paper and pencil test or an online test, and we can then exchange that data as we're doing today with state offices. So if you're in a state that uses LACIS or a state that has some of the proprietary data reporting systems, we're sharing scores every night to state offices so that you don't have to hand enter data into the state reporting system. And we've also been sharing that data with our publishers. On the TABE side, we do that with Aztec and Essential Education, and we're working to share our data with some of the ESL publishers, namely Burlington English is one, and New Readers Press is another one that's working on that for us as well, to be able to accept the TABE data. So all the data, whether it's on the TABE Class-E or the TABE 11 and 12, soon to be 13 and 14, individual student report, is available as a data file to be shared into state data systems, into publisher data systems, or directly into your local data system. Miami-Dade Public Schools uses the PeopleSoft system for all of their student data, and we send all their testing data to that system on a nightly basis. So that's something that both Christine and I can help you with if that is something that is needed to be done with your program. As I mentioned before, TABE Class-E, the existing objectives, which are on the left-hand side of the page, are very well aligned to the new ELP standards. One change that is being made is the area that I have in red, and this happens to be the reading section of the objectives. But in today's forms A and B, quantitative literacy, which some people call numeracy, is its own domain within reading. Under the new ELP standards to the Class-E, C, and D objectives on the right-hand side, you'll notice that numbers and numeracy becomes a subdomain under read words. And this will carry over both for listening and speaking and writing as well, that quantitative literacy no longer is a standalone domain, but it becomes a subdomain under an existing domain. And all that really means that there's a few less questions on the test related to numbers and numeracy. It's still being measured, it's still part of the test, but as a subdomain, it's sharing the space of those questions within the read words category with the other subdomains as well. If you have not seen a Class-E test on our online format, the online window looks exactly like the TABE testing window. So the outside, you have access to the tools across the top. You have access across the bottom for resources of changing the color in the font or flagging the question. In the middle of the screen, this happens to be part of the writing sample questions. Part of the writing test is multiple choice. The other part of the writing test is constructed response. So the students are typing when they're doing the computer-based test. Those constructed responses are stored in the testing platform and can be scored locally with a rubric, or can be scored by DRC for an additional charge. That's a service that we provide for programs that do not want to score the writing or the speaking. Looking at the speaking test as a sample, the students will hear a passage and then a question, and they will record their response into the system as well. And that recorded response is scored by a human. It may be a local educator, or it may be a DRC person. It is not scored by technology, both for writing and for speaking. Just a couple of feedbacks on TABE Class-E specifically over the last year or so. We've had several pilots in larger programs. So just looking real quick at the Miami-Dade Public Schools pilot, they were testing over 500 students on TABE Class-E. Again, on reading and listening, those students were tested also on the CASAS test at the time. That's what they were using for their state reporting within the state of Florida. And the feedback was that, that Class-E was much shorter compared to CASAS, and also it allowed the ESOL students to be a stronger transition over to TABE. So whether you're getting to ESOL levels 5 or 6 here in Florida, or in that transition over to both adult ed and to GED level programs. Some other areas that Miami-Dade had discovered is, again, the alignment. They are using both Burlington English and some internal curriculum that they have developed, and their feedback, and the one feedback that we're working on is to align TABE Class-E more directly with Burlington. And so you'll see that underway with the new forms of C and D as well. And also the connection, if you're not familiar, on the IPDA website here with their IISPs, the instruction skills, you can do that with TABE, and Miami-Dade had put a request out to have IISPs specifically for TABE Class-E, and certainly it's something we're going to work with IPDA to improve on as well. Another one of the pilots that we had was the City Colleges of Chicago. City Colleges did a pilot for the state of Illinois to have, and they did all domain areas for most students, but they also, again, recommended having the TABE Class-E approved within the state of Illinois, and at this time it wasn't approved during the pilot, so they were testing also students on both CASAS and TABE Class-E for those areas of the pilot. The one area that City Colleges in Chicago felt, having more domains allowed them a better chance to have growth within the reporting system. So if a student maybe tested out of reading, they still had listening in it and or writing to provide instructional benefits for those students. A couple of
Mike,
other...
there's a couple questions,
yes,
if you
sure.
can pause.
Yep.
One is Class E captioned for deaf students?
There is text-to-speech functionality for TABE Class-E, just like there is with TABE. So it's a text-to-speech function that can be activated for each student.
And then one other question regarding launch dates for the new online forms, and also when will paper-based copies be available for ordering?
Sure. So some of this is dependent on the federal approval coming from the U.S. Department of Education, but we are moving forward with TABE Class-E Form C and D to be ready to launch on June 4th of this year. So just coming up in a little over a month. That was prioritized because at the time the expiration date was happening sooner than TABE 11 and 12. TABE 11 and 12 will transition to TABE 13 and 14 over the next year. We anticipate 13 and 14 launching in the late summer, early fall. So I'm just going to throw out September as a date right now, as a target date from early September. Both of these dates, our June launch of TABE Class-E and our September launch of TABE 13 and 14, are the internal launching of the tests and making them available for states. Once they're available in our system, then the states themselves will have to add those assessments to their policies and also add any changes to their state data reporting systems. Many of the states are working on that right now, so that it'll be a fairly quick transition. Some states will wait until next July to allow sites to use the new forms. So each state will be separate on when they will have access both to the new form of Class-E and the new forms of TABE 13 and 14. So I encourage you to check with your state office. If you are not a WIOA funded program and you're not using TABE as a reporting tool for WIOA, you would have access to those ahead of time right after we launch them. So you don't have to wait for any state policy changes for that. I do know that we have a couple of people that were registered from the U.S. Department of Labor's Job Corps centers. Just remember, Job Corps centers are completely different, and then a lot of this in the national office of the Job Corps will set that transition as well. So it is dependent on kind of your program itself, but I'm happy to provide any information that I have related across the country for that.
And Mike, one more question. Will we have large print version of the paper copy available?
Yep, yeah, large print and Braille versions will continue for TABE. We have large print also for TABE Class-E on the paper and pencil side. So yes, those accommodated forms will continue just as they are with TABE 11 and 12 and the current TABE Class-E forms A and B. Any other questions, Christine?
Looks like that's all the questions at this time.
Okay, thanks. So just another couple of areas, and again, we've been spending a lot of time on the top left corner here, the WIOA funded kind of interpretation of TABE and TABE Class-E, but we also have correctional programs. Sometimes those are part of WIOA, sometimes they're separate. So just be aware that your correctional program might be a little bit different. We also have a number of states that use TABE for college placement, not for college acceptance, but for placement into the for-credit or not-for-credit programs. So I know the community college system of Hawaii does that. There's the Kentucky Community College system also uses TABE for placement purposes. So a lot of different areas that TABE is being used for placement. Also on the right-hand side for high school equivalency, there are several states that are looking at using TABE as options for high school equivalency. Tennessee is kind of the leader for this. They are beginning to launch a new program that if you obtain a certain score on TABE reading, math, or language, you'll be able to use that score for your high school equivalency and skip those sections. Primarily, Tennessee is a high set testing state, so you would be able to skip those sections on the high set test and combine them with your science and social studies test to have your high school equivalency. With Tennessee's work, I know other states are looking at those programs. Those are our state-specific initiatives, so they're not driven by DRC. We're certainly supporting Tennessee and working with the scores that they need, but just be aware that if you're in a state, it is a state initiative, not a TABE or DRC initiative to have that alignment with high school equivalency testing. The biggest area was that top right-hand corner for workforce readiness and workforce placement. Many programs use TABE today to align to IETs or to CTE programs or have partnerships with local employers. So you may have a relationship with a workforce board or a workforce center or even a direct employer that is looking to have a pool of candidates assessed to be ready for certain career areas or certain jobs. And certainly TABE is doing that. If you're in Nebraska, the state police, to get into the academy, you have to take a TABE test. If you're in South Carolina to work at the Dow Chemical Factory, there's a TABE test required. In Kentucky, if you want to work for the Jim Beam Distillery, there are about 18 different jobs at the distillery that require a TABE test. All of those uses typically are not partners of DRC, they're partners of local education programs, whether they're community college or workforce centers. So they're working with the local resources to try to align the potential employees to these career areas. To help that, we did a research project with Metametrics. Metametrics is a research company from North Carolina that developed Lexile reading measures and quantile math measures. And you may be familiar with that in the K-12 area. They're quite prevalent across the states for Lexiles and quantiles with students in K-12 systems. In the fall of 22, we took out the unscored questions of TABE and put in the Lexile and the quantile analyzing questions so that we were able to align TABE reading and math scores to the Lexile and quantile measures that Metametrics publishes. On a separate project, Metametrics worked with the U.S. Department of Labor to align Lexiles and quantiles to the curriculum and to the career areas from the ONET database on the Department of Labor's website. So now Metametrics had the Lexile and quantile data for the most in-demand careers, and we had the TABE alignment to Lexiles and quantiles with our TABE test, and so we put those together to launch our new workforce portal. The workforce portal is available in the TABE portal. It is an instructor or administrator-driven tool. It's not a student-driven tool. So it is available for programs to add to the reporting capability. It is a separate add-on piece. This is an example of the workforce portal. I've gone in and looked up John Weiss up in the top left corner. John is a student in my program. He told me that he wants to go into heating and air conditioning. He knows that's a good career in his area, or he has other family and friends that are in that career. So he wants to work for a CTE program to get ready for that career area. I can pull up the heating and air conditioning and refrigeration and mechanic installer career in the workforce portal and see what targeted TABE scores in the gray shaded area that career area is. So the 576 for reading, the 558 for math are the targeted scores based on the Lexile and quantile alignments from Metametrics on the reading and math levels for a student in year one of that career. So it's kind of important to remember that this is year one of this career area, not to get into the CTE, not to be ready for an IET. So maybe we don't have to be above that to start training for this position, especially in an IET world where I'm working on my basic skills. And in this case, John's purple TABE scores are far below kind of the accepted area for this career area. So this is a great resource to show the students saying, hey, you want to get into this career, here's the math and reading requirements for that career area. Here's where you're at. And we want to work on improving and raising these purple scores to be a little bit closer to the career areas. On the workforce portal, we also pull in the Department of Labor's information on salary and growth for that career. So we can see this HVAC career area and where it's growing and where it has the salary implications in hourly pay rates for that, and what's the growth expectations across the country. Once we pull up that career for John, we can also look at key tasks that are used in that career and align it to other career areas that he might also have interest in. So here in this case, heating and air conditioning has similar tasks going into plumbing and pipe fitting or solar thermal installing. So those might be other career areas that John might look into, and we can see if they're interested in those areas. A couple of other ones that I just pulled up. First, I looked at Chastity. And Chastity didn't know what career she wanted to go into. So I just pulled Chastity up in the career database and it found over 50 careers that her TABE scores align to. So I can show this list to the student and see, are any of these 50 plus careers something that you're interested in? And we can look at the detailed report for any one of those. So the workforce portal will work if you're looking at a specific career for a student, or if your student wants to see what career areas they're already potentially ready for. These 50 for Chastity are careers that her TABE scores are already at or above, and she could be ready to move into that fairly easily. Just to look at a couple of other ones, the phlebotomist is quite a big area of need across the country, and we can see the TABE score. I'm going to point out that 563, and if I go back a couple of slides and look at the 576, we're going to come back to those scores a little bit later. So those are upper 500 scores, and we'll just remember that as we go forward. Also, that solar installer position, again, a 545 for the reading and 558 for the math. Again, this workforce portal is available to any program that's using TABE. It is an extra cost for the test for the reporting system. It's $5 per student per year. So it's not by how many tests that the person takes, it's just $5 per year. So if a person took a reading test 3 or 4 times in a year and you wanted to see if they're improving and what careers they might be eligible for, you can rerun the workforce portal reports at no additional cost during that year. So it's just one-time fee for per student for that. There are more information related to the workforce portal that's on our TABE test website, and I'll have that link at the end of our presentation as well today. So just to cover a couple of other areas, and again, where resources are available, there's 2 main resource portals for TABE. One is within the Insight testing portal. And within that portal where you've logged into our testing system, you will have our administrative manuals, our test directions, all the technical manuals for the testing platform. So again, I remember that I've logged into the portal. That's where I can get the manuals. If I go to our public website of tabetest.com, that's where I can get my instructional resources and my updates related to the announcements. So new sample questions, the new blueprints for TABE 13 and 14 and for TABE Class-E, C, and D will be posted to the public website. And also any additional research that we have will be on our public website of tabetest.com. One resource that will be getting published very soon is a chart that is helpful for programs to determine what's the next test to assign. And certainly if you're in Miami-Dade's public schools, this will look very familiar with you. We kind of modified what we saw that you guys were doing, and we added the language portion of the test. So we certainly thank you for the work on that. But I'm going to look at the top left corner. If you have a student that took a level E reading test and they scored above a 500 on level E of reading, their next test should be level M of reading, because there's no more growth for NRS reporting at level E once you get above a 500. You're already at NRS level 3. There is no level above NRS level 3 for Form E on the test. So that's kind of how you read this from left to right. I'm giving a pretest in level E. What was the student's score? What's the next suggested test level in the middle column? There is a chart like this for TABE Class-E as well. Both of them will be getting posted to the website shortly. If you need them ahead of time, I'm happy to share them. But you'll have this information on tabetest.com very shortly. Another area that we want to make sure we cover specifically is the reports that are available both for TABE and TABE Class-E. There are individual reports available and there are group reports available. We'll primarily look at the individual reports today, but just know that you can go into the portal and run a roster report for all students that are in a test session. So that on-demand roster will allow you to look at multiple students and get a summary of all their scores. There's also the option to run an on-demand extract report within our portal. The important part about the on-demand extract is that it allows you to get your data out into an Excel format instead of a PDF report. The other very important part about the on-demand extract is that the scores are available immediately after a student finishes their test. So some programs have had challenges waiting for the reports to be ready after a student has tested. The scoring of the test happens immediately. The publishing it into the PDF format is what takes a few minutes after the students are done. Typically no more than 5 to 7 minutes. If it's more than 15 minutes, we ask that you call our support team and have them walk through and try to diagnose what that problem might be. But if you absolutely need a score very quickly, the on-demand extract will allow you to get that score immediately. Another version of that extract is the nightly export, and that's the file that I mentioned that we can share overnight to your publishing partners, to the state database, or to your own database locally if you need that. So very similar data sets on the on-demand extract and the nightly export, just one comes at 2 in the morning and one you can do anytime that you want to. You can log into the portal and run that on-demand extract. In the individual profile report, first for TABE, a couple of things to remember. The information at the very top of the screen is related to the student. So around that blue bar is who the student was and where they tested. In the gray section in the middle, what content areas they took of the test, how they did on the points available on the test, and what their score was related to the scale scores. Out on the far right, you'll see we've added that measurable skills gain column. And just an important point on the measurable skills gain, it is reflective of how that student has done since July 1st. So you'll notice that the test date for this student was October 25th, and it shows a yes for reading. That means between July 1st and October 25th, they previously took a reading test, and this new test is an improvement on the NRS level. So again, some states allow carryover of periods of participation for scores. We had to standardize on one specific date, and we chose the start of the program year. So you'll notice that this date may be different than your state database. This is just a guide. Your state database is the official record for that student. At the bottom of the screen, we see the breakout of the domains, those key ideas and details, the craft and structure. Those are the areas from the blueprint. What the bottom also helps is, from an instructional standpoint, it helps me identify where the 2-point questions are coming from. So key ideas and details, it was 18 questions that were worth 18 points. Obviously, those are all 1-point questions. But craft and structure was 17 questions worth 20 points. So there's 3 2-point questions in that domain. And then integration of knowledge and ideas, 5 questions worth 9 points. So 4 questions. So again, it's helpful from an instructional standpoint to understand what types of questions the students were interacting with and maybe where they were deficient or excelling in those areas. On the second and third page of the individual profile report, we have the demonstrated skills and the areas of next focus. So if you'll notice the columns, they're not strengths and weaknesses. These are demonstrated skills for the questions that they got correct and areas of next focus for the questions that they got wrong. One word of caution is when we look at this report, and I'm going to go backwards a page here, this student did very well on reading. They are fully proficient in all areas of reading, but the test level was level M at the top of the screen. So they're proficient as measured by level M. They're not fully proficient in reading in general, just in the concepts that were covered in level M. So when we look at where my areas of next focus are, there are skills that I can improve on. They happen to be level D skills because we project up to the next test that you might be taking for that. So again, remembering that when I'm fully proficient or marked as proficiency in the performance column, some people have asked, why is this not blank? Because I answered every question correct for that area, because we're projecting up to the next level of TABE for that. For TABE Class-E, very similar. We just changed the colors in the orange bar areas, the student's name above and the test location below the orange bar. In the gray first grade area, what content areas did you test on? It may be reading and listening. It may be reading, listening, writing, and speaking. It's up to that program to decide. And then what were my points again for that area? And then down below, how did I do on the objectives? As I mentioned earlier, quantitative literacy was its own domain on the current forms A and B. That will now get rolled into a subdomain under read words in the new form. So we'll see that change a little bit on the test. On the second and third page as well, that same demonstrated skills and areas of next focus. These are the skills that we're working to share a little bit more with Burlington English, for example. Right now, you can go into the Burlington English and assign a lesson or a series of lessons related to quantitative literacy or read words or reading comprehension. But on the adult ed side, you can go in and find lessons specifically to each skill. And we want to provide that level of detail to Burlington so that they can have more targeted instruction related to that, as well as other publishers on the ESL side as well. Finally, just to touch on a little bit of the research, and just real quick, Christine, any other questions coming up?
Yes, there's a couple questions, and I think you're gonna maybe talk about it here, but one question is, will the target GED ready scores change?
So it's a great question, and it's kind of right where we're talking about. And the short answer is no. The scale scores for TABE 11 and 12 will be the same scale scores for TABE 13 and 14. So on a psychometric side, our psychometricians can equate those to use the same scale scores. A scale score, just as a reminder, is a proprietary set of scores or scale for a publisher. So we as DRC have a scale to use for TABE, and we can align the test forms to that scale. So we won't see a change in those alignments. Other questions?
Yes. Going back to the reports and the topics that would be next. The question is, are these still cookie cutter or generic, or specific to the topic missed?
The areas of next focus are related to what the student has performed lesser on or weak on. The areas that they were, so if I go back to the beginning, the areas of next focus would be the skills in the non-proficiency or the partial proficiency area. So the skills that related, in this case on the math for this student, for number and operation of fractions, they were partially proficient. So what skills were part of that that will report in that area of weakness? I only have reading on this sample, but on our website, the full report is there, but they are targeted for that student.
And it looks like that's all of the questions. There was a question about receiving this presentation, and I do believe it's on the IPDAY site. And these webinars are also going to be available on the IPDAY site.
Correct. They're all recorded and posted to the IPDAY website as well, yes. So going back to the high school equivalency alignment, kind of to build on that question, we had a research study where we had students take TABE and go on to take the high school equivalency test, both the GED and the HiSET. And we did an alignment to those tests based on the student's performance. And what we found is on reading is that a baseline score of a 536 provided a strong likelihood that students would pass at a minimum level both the HiSET and the GED reading test. So that 536 is kind of the cut point to get to the 145 on the GED, or the score of 8 on the HiSET for minimally passing those high school equivalency tests. Again, remember, minimally passing is a great accomplishment for the students, but it doesn't always mean that they're ready for the next step. So both publishers of high school equivalencies have those college and career ready or college ready scores, and we see those represented on the chart of the 627, and then the GED has that third level of the college ready plus credit of the 721. So getting a 536 on a TABE test has a strong likelihood of getting to the 145 on the GED or the 8 on the HiSET. It doesn't necessarily mean you're at the 12th grade level for reading or a 12th grade level for math. And I'll go to the next slide because it has the math scores of 537. It does mean that you have the level to pass that test at the minimum threshold. So I always kind of use that example that if I go through high school and get C's and D's in high school, I am minimally passing high school, but I might not be ready for a career, or I might not be ready to move into a post-secondary program. So I may take a placement test and get placed into a non-credit remedial program to build up those scores. And so again, I did graduate or I did get my diploma, but I might not be ready for the rigors of the next step that I want to go at. And that's why those publishers have those second and third level cut scores for that. With that data, we were able to align, and I kind of draw back to those workforce portal scores of the 547 that I mentioned, and I think the 565 was the other one. Those scores are above the minimum threshold to pass their high school equivalency test. In the job description, they do say high school diploma or equivalency, but we notice that, again, the skills needed in that job are above the minimum required threshold. So it's a great tool to put this research with the workforce portal to say, yes, you want to go into HVAC or you want to go into the phlebotomist program, but we want to get your readiness for your high school equivalency up above just the basic passing line. We might not have to get to that GED college ready up to the 165 or the 15 on the high set, but we want to get closer to that than we are to the minimum score. So to get you have the best chance of success after high school equivalency attainment. The other area that we put this research together is to work on a grade kind of range reporting system. Many programs ask us all the time, what's the grade equivalent for a TABE score? And we did away with grade equivalence as a term after moving away from TABE 9 and 10. A grade equivalent of a 9.2 is a very hard score to validate. What was everybody doing in the 9th grade in the second month? Well, for me, that was in the middle 80s. And if I could remember what it was, I would say that it's probably Algebra 1. But if I ask my son, who's 28 years old, what was 9th grade math for him, he's going to tell me it's geometry. So our perceptions of 9th grade are vastly different. So if I'm looking for a 9th grade requirement, is it in today's terms? Is it in the 80s standards that I went through, or in the 2000s with my son? So it's open to a lot of interpretation when we talk about grade levels. When we did the workforce portal work with Metametrics, one benefit is that the lexiles and quantiles that Metametrics reports across the 35 or so states that they work with on a K-12, they norm those levels on an annual basis with all the K-12 students. So they have a strong background on what is the lexile and quantile level of today's 3rd grader or 5th grader or 12th grader. So we can align that information together and try to help connect a grade range of scores. And so what that has kind of led to is this chart that's getting finalized. So it's not posted to the website yet, but we're working on getting it finalized. But it generally shows the range of scores for grade levels. And I'm going to focus in on that 536 that we saw earlier for the high school equivalency. So getting a 536 on reading means I'm somewhere in that 8th to 9th grade level. So if I think about that in real world terms, if I took the average high school freshman and gave them the GED test or the high set, I would expect them to pass at a minimum level. If I gave that same student the same test 4 years later when they're finishing high school, I would expect them to perform higher because they've been exposed to more content and more instruction over that time. So again, getting a 145 on the GED doesn't mean I'm at the 12th grade level. Getting a passing score on TABE of a 536 doesn't necessarily mean I'm ready to exit. I have a strong likelihood of passing high school equivalency, but I might not be ready to succeed what the Department of Education wants. But what this is showing us is that if I look at 536, which is the start of NRS level 4, could I be ready for moving into that CTE program or into that IET program? There are other programs that are looking for an 11th grade. I mentioned the Nebraska State Patrol or the U.S. Department of the Army uses TABE for a lot of their chief warrant officer programs, and those levels they're looking for specific scores for their purposes. And this chart can be helpful. So again, if I'm looking for an 11th grade range for my program, that's somewhere in the upper part of the 500 range, 576 to 596. I, as a program, should look at the TABE blueprint, look at the content of the test, and say, do I want a student to do well on the content of level D, to get to those scores, or do I want a student to be, performing just at a minimum threshold on a level A to get to those scores? So that's kind of the research that a program or an employer might look at to how to connect the grade ranges to the content. I'm saying, 536 is a score that I can get on a level M TABE, a level D TABE, and a level A TABE. They mean a little bit different based on the contents that I was exposed to. On level M, I'm getting almost a perfect score to get to that 536. On level D, I'm getting an intermediate score to get to 536 because the scale keeps expanding above me. And then on level A, it's a minimum score to qualify for a scale score. That's the lowest possible score. But all of the content on level A is above that threshold. So, for an employer, for a workforce program, they want to understand what's the content being measured in relation to those scores as well. So again, this grade range chart will be posted to our website in the near future. We're going through some final edits on it. And I'm happy to answer any questions, that you might have after that as we get closer to publishing that. I'm going to stop there, Christine, to see if there's any other questions that we can answer.
Any questions?
I see one question in the Q&A that is addressing something about if a department doesn't follow the prescribed sequence of testing, we are randomizing what test to give students, so the next area of focus is ineffective. I'm happy to take that offline. If you want to send me a quick email, on the screen is my email. We can try to see what areas that we can help with those, either department or states kind of following that process. A lot of that depends if you're a WIOA funded program or not. So again, kind of fitting into those areas. I'm going to switch over. Again, happy to email me if you have a question after we're done. I'm going to switch over to the IPDA feedback. Just if you stay on for just a quick second for the survey, that would be greatly appreciated. But thank you very much.
And Mike, one more question, just to clarify, TABE Class-E will take effect this June?
We will launch the new forms of TABE Class-E this June. The current forms of A and B are federally approved until next June. If your state is already using Class E, you will continue to use the current forms going forward. If your state is new to TABE Class-E, they might start with the new forms after July 1st. So again, we will launch the test in the first part of June. When your state allows you access to it will depend on their assessment policy. And I see in the comments, it looks like somebody may have joined a little bit late talking about 13 and 14. TABE 13 and 14, very similar to TABE Class-E. It will launch later in the summer, early fall. But again, it will be up to your state when they adopt it and allow you access to it. But it will be after, let's say, September for TABE 13 and 14. And I appreciate your time taking the feedback on the screen. And if you have any other questions, I'm going to slide that out of the way a little bit and just go backwards a slide. So my email is still there. If you need my emails, you can always send me a quick email and I can get you in touch with any resources that may need to help you in your program. But thank you again for your time. I do know that there are other IPDA webinars coming up. The next one is on May 1st and is related to PowerPoint techniques. It's at 3 o'clock Eastern. So if you need more information for that webinar that's offered by IPDA, you can go to the IPDA website. But I thank you for your time and I look forward to meeting up with you later.